it's highly likely that we'll see some form of distance charge for driving. I suspect that that will come at some point, but whether road pricing, using that as a tool for managing traffic demand, comes along, I suspect I'll be driving or being driven around in a driverless car before that happens.
Welcome to Calling All Stations, the transport podcast. I'm Christian Wolmar, an author and journalist who has covered transport for the past 30 years. And in every episode, we try to keep you up to date with the most engaging news stories, policy developments, and interviews in the transport world. And with me is my regular co-presenter, Mark Walker, who has spent decades looking at transport policies and legislation. So, Mark, what have we got today?
Hello, Christian, and hello to our listeners. You have an interview in this episode with Steve Gooding, who's the director of the RAC Foundation. And you've been talking to Steve about changes in policy and investment and financing related to motoring and the roads network, and also specifically to some of the issues that were covered, or in some cases not covered, in the Chancellor's budget last week. Later in the episode, you and I will also be discussing the budget again in slightly more expansive areas, covering all of the decisions and announcements that were made relating to transport. But first of all, here's your interview with Steve Gooding, director of the RAC Foundation.
The budget had some surprises in it, and one of those was definitely the fact that fuel prices, the tax on fuel is not going up, and indeed the Tory reduction of that has not been cancelled. So that was really something that was unexpected after 14 years of no fuel tax increases. But also there was absolutely no mention of road pricing. So I thought I would have a chat with Steve Gooding of the RAC Foundation to see what he thinks the future of taxation and motoring is going to be. So, Steve, first of all, were you surprised that they did not at least reverse the fuel tax cut or indeed impose a new one?
Well, Christian, I have to say on the morning of the budget, I was in conversation with someone who told me that it was inevitable that fuel duty would rise later that day. And I said to them, there are no inevitabilities in this picture, and perhaps that's the only bit of forecasting I've got right so far. Yes, I was surprised. I think that so much had been said in advance of this budget about the tough times we were in and the black hole to be filled, and also that early in a new parliament where you have a big majority is the time, by popular consensus, that's the time to get the really difficult stuff out the way. That I did myself expect that the 5p discount the last government introduced would go on its way. I can understand the reasons for it. I can understand the economic rationale for it. But the short answer to your question is, yeah, I think I'm as surprised as everyone else.
Well, you can understand the rationale for actually having cancelled the increase. So you can see the rationale for increasing fuel tax.
I think viewed again through the Chancellor's eyes, there's an issue here about household incomes. And we all know that whether we like it or not, an awful lot of the travel that we all do, we do by road, we do in motor vehicles. But also there's a knock-on effect if you're hitting business with the increase in national insurance contributions for employers. A lot of businesses are using road vehicles as part of their business activity, and a lot of freight and logistics as well. So again, we might all want to see more freight on rail, but for the time being at least, if you're trying to signal to your electorate that you're on their side, you're behind the strivers, and you want business to succeed, and you want your industrial strategy to succeed, I can see why you might choose this approach as she has in comparison to some of the other things she should do. I have to say, to be perfectly honest, had she chosen to do it, I think I could probably see the economic rationale for that too.
Right, because what would be the rationale for increasing it?
Well, for increasing, I think at the moment we have a relatively, looking over the last 5 or so years, a relatively low barrel price of oil. We've had a lot of anxiety, certainly over the last 12 months, about the awful situation in the Middle East, and a sense that we might be seeing restrictions on oil production, therefore an increase in the barrel price of oil. You don't really want to be putting up your fuel duty at the same time as the barrel price of oil is going up. We appear to be in a little window, perhaps of stability and even perhaps of hope that the situation in the Middle East might die down a bit. So just on the sort of the financial side, this might have been a moment to do it. Economically, again, if you really are as tight for money as the Chancellor has told us that she is, and you really are more concerned about some of the other public services that you're trying to fund, I'm thinking obviously of health, education, and the like,
Yeah.
then I think you might be able to, you could probably politically, perhaps rather than economically, be able to say the 5p was only ever a discount. It was only ever a get us over a particular peak of difficulty. Just one of the many legacies that the previous Chancellor left for me. And I'm afraid I'm going to have to back my way out of that. It was only ever a discount. It wasn't, I'm not putting the rate up. It's just a discount. It's a discount that's gone. We're going to have to suck it up if we want the public services that you elected us to provide.
Yes, quite a good argument there, Steve. You should possibly go into politics and argue either side. I must say I was certainly of the your second argument. I supported that idea, particularly. I mean, I digress slightly, but it is very strange that the barrel price of oil has not gone up despite the war in Ukraine and the conflict in the Middle East. It's quite a remarkable period of stability. And do you worry that this might end soon, and that we're going to get some worldwide increases in oil price, or do you think this stability is, given that it survived, 2 wars, might be a long-term proposition?
I fear that I've been coming up to a decade in this job, Christian, looking amongst other things at what factors influence the price we pay for fuel on the forecourt. And I would say it's a mug's game to predict exactly what's going to happen next. I don't personally see the tides of global instability settling down just yet, because we haven't got the resolved situation in either the Ukraine or the Middle East. We've had the terrible flooding in Spain. We have crises caused by the climate change, and we have to wait until next week to know who the next president of the United States is going to be. All of these, in their own way, play a part. So I suspect if I were an extremely brave person, I think I might say that we've had a period where the barrel price has been relatively stable. With a bit of luck, we'll see that through to maybe the early months of next year. Beyond the early months of next year, if I was an investor, I'd be busy hedging my bets.
Do you think that one of the reasons she didn't increase fuel duty or even reverse the cut is that this is a doomed tax in a way, and therefore over-reliance on this tax is only a short-term measure, because ultimately, as we get more electric cars and maybe even more other forms of sustainable travel, the take from this tax is going to be lower, and maybe this is a sort of anticipation of that.
I think that's entirely possible that was the thinking. I should stress, I'm not privy to the thinking that goes on in Great George Street, so I don't know what the Chancellor had in her mind. It is, as you say, in its way, something of a doomed tax, but the doom is not as close to us as some have predicted. Our own calculations, we put a wide band of possibility here, but by our own calculations, or rather, try this on you. If you have a look at the 6th carbon budget and look at what's needed to achieve that by way of the take-up of non-fossil fueled motor vehicles, there'll still be something in the region of 20 million fossil fuel vehicles driving around in 2030.
Right.
And if anything, we're seeing the We're seeing a trend in motor vehicles, not just motor cars, but motor vehicles. They're lasting longer. We're seeing older cars being kept going for longer. So I think it's not as doomed as some might think. If we're looking at 2040, 2050, then maybe so. But it's still quite a money spinner. Even by 2030, the Chancellor could be looking at in the region of sort of 18, 19, maybe 20 billion. That will be without putting the rate up. And others, I'm referred to by noble predecessor here, Stephen Glaister, have pointed out that if all the government had been to keep the rate of fuel duty in line with inflation, it would have gone up much more significantly than the 5p discount that we're talking about. So maybe it's doomed, but I'm not sure that would have played that heavily in her mind.
Interesting. And so you're basically arguing that cars are lasting long. Indeed, my 21-year-old Skoda is outside my front door at the moment, and I have no intention of replacing it. So that's a fact. And the take up of electric cars has slowed down somewhat.
Well, I think, again, what we have to bear in mind with the take up of electric cars is that it is early days and we see some volatility in the take up. It'd be lovely, wouldn't it, if we could say, here's where we are in 2024, here's where we need to be in 2030, here's a straight line, let's stick with it. Well, the world isn't going to be like that. And in particular, the world we're talking about is still in many ways recovering from the shock of COVID and the revolution that means that you and I are having this discussion from our homes. And once upon a time, we'd be having this discussion in an office somewhere.
Absolutely.
So the patterns of travel that we're accommodating are different as well. But what is very clear is that we have about 1 million, I think it is now, electric cars driving on the roads. We have a very, I think the SMMT would say, a very fierce zero emission vehicle mandate that is biting on the automotive sector. And one of the perhaps less trumpeted things that the Chancellor did in her budget was to double the rate of year one vehicle excise duty on new cars from next April if they're not zero tailpipe emission. So the government's dislike of hybrid cars continues. They're trying to make us all make the jump in one go. And a lot of people are nervous about making a big jump in one go. So it doesn't surprise me we've seen a little bit of cooling off, which could be as much to do with the fact that this is a big investment decision. And for all of those reasons about what's going on in the world, people are being a bit more cautious about their investment decisions rather than any particular like or dislike of electric drivetrains.
Well, which brings us to the interesting point about replacing the present tax with some form of road pricing, which would include electric cars, of course. And there's no mention of this in the budget. And indeed, there doesn't seem to be much work being done behind the scenes. But maybe you could enlighten me on that. But is not the shift towards some sort of road pricing inevitable? I mean, I've been writing about transport for something 30 years. And I remember writing a pamphlet about it right at the beginning of my career in transport about how it was inevitable that eventually road pricing would take over. And yet we've seen no sign of it. Do you think that this is being discussed at all?
I think it is being discussed. In fact, I know it's being discussed because the previous Chancellor's special advisor wrote a long article about it, which appeared in one of the national newspapers, saying how he'd been approached by and sought to be persuaded by nameless officials who were having a look at this. So we know that people are having a think about it, but I have to pull you up on that word again, inevitable. There are only two things in our lives that are inevitable, as we all know. They are death and taxes,
Right.
and they're both inevitable and unpredictable. And when it comes to road pricing, and we should be clear for listeners to the podcast, we're talking here about prices that vary according to where you are, when you're there, not just on how far you're traveling. I think the work that I did, the work that others did on this over the years have revealed it looks good on paper and it's very, very hard to do in practice. So I think that it's highly likely that we'll see some form of distance charge for driving. And we've seen that being introduced successfully in a low-key manner, in a low-tech manner in New Zealand and in Iceland. I suspect that that will come at some point, but whether road pricing, using that as a tool for managing traffic demand, comes along, I suspect I'll be driving or being driven around in a driverless car before that happens.
We won't go on to driverless cars. I talk a lot about driverless cars on this podcast, and I'm sure many listeners are bored with my skepticism about it. So we won't go down that path. But you really think that it is more likely to get driverless cars rather than any form of kind of serious road pricing? And we're not just, as you say, we're not just talking about a limited congestion charge of certain zone. We're talking about a sophisticated system that might charge you 5p a mile if you're driving in Lincolnshire, and maybe 30p a mile if you're driving in London or something like that. I mean, that kind of system.
I think that kind of system, one can postulate it and one can model it, but when it actually comes to as we need to do as advisors in this world, imagining ourselves on the stump as a politician, explaining it and explaining why the price is what it is for that time of day in that location and how that actually works out. And here's an important thing, how that works out and what it is it's going to deliver to you, the voter, you, the citizen. Is it going to be effective? And I'll give you an example. I had to make a trip the other day. I made a trip on road, I confess, and my trip was interrupted by two types of street works, which were not within the control of the highway authority. One was about a water main, one was about some gas works, it appeared to be, and two, what looked like a breakdown in a collision. Now, we couldn't pretend, we mustn't pretend that those things are going to stop happening in a world of road pricing, which they might not have as dramatic an effect. They might be a bit less of a queue, but thinking of this in a political environment, if the pitch of introducing this pricing is your journeys are going to be so much better, and it turns out for whatever bad reason they're not. Anyone who was trying to cross the River Thames to the east of London last week would have found that the Dartford tunnels were disrupted and the Dartford Bridge was disrupted, and the red line on the travel planner maps stretched way beyond the Dartford crossing. Road pricing might have made the queues a little bit less because we all know that's a heavily trafficked time of day, but they wouldn't have stopped the bad thing happening. And that makes the political pitch, the offer that we're making, really difficult with an already skeptical public. And I hesitate to quote Ronald Reagan, but the scariest words in the English language, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help," ring in my ears at this point.
So I'm surprised at how skeptical you are, given that you have done a lot of work on this and you've been relatively supportive of it. But you really think that, say, just arbitrarily, 2029, when there'll be another election, you think we won't have seen much shift in this idea or thinking around this issue at all. And we'll still have, as you say, 20 million cars on the road paying fuel tax, and the Chancellor will be happy with that. We're not going to look at this seriously.
Let me just say it's plausible that the Chancellor of 2026-27 will have worked out with her or his officials a way of bolstering the coffers of the Treasury. And I think they probably will find a way of introducing a distance charge. They have options beyond that. They can always put up vehicle excise duty. Doesn't have any particular impact on traffic, but it's all money. They can put up a vehicle excise duty. They can put up motor insurance tax. Goodness forbid that they do that with insurance rates as they are. But would they go for something more than that? Well, I suspect the Chancellor, as a finance minister, obviously they're thinking of the health of the economy, and they might dabble in it. But I just wonder whether they'll think, and this is the point that I've made repeatedly, if they think we could introduce something that is less risky and would raise the money that we need, why wouldn't we go down that path? And if that works, as I think it could, fairly straightforwardly, I've mentioned other countries that have done it. If it works, it takes some of the public antipathy away. It takes some of the uncertainty. It's not a massive change. It's not yesterday we all paid this way and tomorrow we're all going to pay that way. It's yesterday you paid this. Some of you are going to pay something else now because you're driving electric cars, and it's only fair that you make a contribution to the Exchequer, because motoring always has over the last 100 years or so. It's going to be broadly based on the number of miles you do. So there you go.
Oh, so you think you'd
be a bit
start
less.
off with electric cars, charging electric cars and not charging?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, right.
Yes, that is what I do, and I've got two reasons for doing
Yeah.
that. One is, frankly, fuel duty. For whatever else we say about it, fuel duty is one of the few carbon-focused fiscal measures that we've got, and we need to be serious about tackling our CO2 emissions. And fuel duty focuses with laser-like accuracy on that. Second, it's really easy to collect. It's really cheap to collect. It has the lowest cost of collection of any tax ever invented anywhere in history. So I would keep doing that. And I said
And you can't dodge it.
First,
You can't dodge it unless you steal the petrol.
you don't dodge it, because unless and I would never steal the petrol, but you can't dodge it because, of course, the government takes its cut of the money upstream.
Right.
So it's not like you and I are
Right.
fishing 55 pence out of our pockets. The money's already gone by the time it gets to us, and the oil companies are recovering it from us. So there's an ease of collection. There's a low cost of collection. It's very, very certain. It targets carbon. And if I didn't have to do something that affected 34 million vehicles and 39 million drivers overnight, but I could do something that affected, say, 1 to 2 million vehicles,
The electric ones.
2 million
Yeah.
drivers, why wouldn't I go with something that just feels a bit more manageable?
Except then, of course, the argument would be, hey, you've pushed us into buying electric cars because it's environmentally more sustainable. Now there's taxes.
Well, I think there's, again, we've opined on this, you and I think that there is a conundrum there. I don't see any way around the conundrum. The fact is, either the Chancellor of 26, 27 takes the view, one of the bits of investment that they are doing is by not imposing this charge on electric cars. That is the price of achieving our carbon goals. They could view it that way. Perfectly defensible to view it that way. Or if they're saying, well, we do need motorists to contribute to the Exchequer. They have for the last 100 years, and we want them to carry on doing so. Then I don't think it is beyond the wit of people in the Treasury to contrive that the amount they charge is less than it otherwise would have been. Now, it still leaves a gap in the Treasury coffers.
Yeah.
But I think I could reasonably say, this is how much you would have been paying to keep running your Skoda. This is how much in future you would expect to be paying running your, I don't know, your Tesla Model 3 or your mini electric, whatever it is. And in the round, very important that they don't make a too specific a promise, because someone will always prove them wrong in the specific. But in the generally speaking, per mile, it's always going to be less to drive electric. Off you go. And
so technologically, one of the barriers to this is, you're saying you'd have to fit something to 39 million cars, and you think technologically that is feasible but difficult or unfeasible? Or
there are ways of running a full-on road pricing system, simply by obliging motorists to use smartphones. You know, there are ways of doing this. Some of the challenges that we addressed back in the road pricing feasibility work in the early noughties was looking at, there are ways one can do things with a compliant and happy population. Let's put it that way. You know, there are lots of things you can do using a mobile phone. One of the things you can do is turn it off. One of the things you can do with anything that's put in the vehicle that is transmitting is to get a bit of tin foil and wrap it round it. You know, so we've got to be a bit careful about what is transmitted from the vehicle and what government actually needs to know. But I think the the fitting of something is of itself not a huge problem, requiring compliance. I think any system compared to fuel duty is going to need more activity and more cost to deliver compliance. And if we take an extreme example that you and I are both very familiar with, the London congestion charge, and look at the operating and compliance cost of that, it's way more than fuel duty, but that's what it is. It is a significant percentage of the overall cost of the scheme.
It's a clunky old system. It's a clunky old system, which they haven't changed since they introduced it 20 years ago, have they?
Well, indeed, it's a system that betrays its age, but the beauty of it is a very simple thing. It is widely understood. It doesn't have the lowest operating cost of any system in the world, but the Mayor for London looking at it could quite reasonably say, well, that's the operating cost, and what I get by way of benefit is worth the operating cost. It's when we're using a fiscal measure to achieve a policy outcome as well as some money in the bank, that we have to make those judgments.
Well, thank you for that run around the issues of road pricing, Steve. And I somewhat suspect we've had this discussion some years ago, you and me, and I somewhat suspect we might be having it in a few years' time again. But thank you for coming on the podcast and for a very interesting interview.
Thanks very much, Christian. I look forward to the further discussion.
Christian, what were your main observations from your interview with Steve Gooding?
Well, I thought it was interesting that he really wasn't pushing road pricing. He's somebody who's talked about road pricing for years, actually, but he wasn't really pushing it as hard as I thought he might. And he was quite relaxed about the fact that, there's going to be still, he said, 20 million cars at least, fossil-fueled cars by 2030, despite the efforts to get to net zero. And therefore, it's not quite as pressing a problem for the government as some people think. I'm not entirely sure I agree with that. I think as there's going to be more and more electric cars getting a free pass, they're going to have to find some way of taxing that. And indeed, he did suggest, which I think might well happen, that it will be electric cars that have to start paying by the mile, because, of course, at the moment, they're not paying for any fuel tax. But I thought he raised other issues in the budget, which you've been looking at, Mark.
Yes, the budget statement on the 30th of October from the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, contained a few headlines that were in the speech that were delivered in the House of Commons. But of course, there's a voluminous document that's published at the same time.
The Red Book.
Yes, which appears just as the Chancellor completes the speech. And often that provides some very interesting material when you dive into it and look through the relevant sections. So I've got a few headlines and outstanding points here that I thought we might discuss. And in a way, perhaps related to your discussion with Steve on motoring and road costs, was the fact that, contrary to some of the prior spin, the Chancellor did not announce any change to the level of fuel duty. And in fact, the Chancellor turned this into a virtue, saying that it would save the average car driver £59 a year, not restoring the 5p cut that was introduced by the previous government, or indeed restoring any kind of indexation of fuel duty costs.
Seems a bit trivial, actually, £59 a year, given that this raises so much money, and also it kind of addresses a bit the terms of trade between road users and rail users. And that's something that, I had hoped that they would be beginning to look at, because we've had 14 years of no fuel duty increases, and meanwhile rail fares have probably more than doubled in that period. So I think for a government that's intent on trying to support sustainable travel that's to some extent has recognized the connection between getting people to use public transport and cycling and walking and health. And yet in this budget, they seem to have just stuck with the old tried and tested model of helping the motorist and not the rail user. Don't you think that?
I do wonder whether there was a bit of a loss of nerve here because of all the controversy around the pre-election pledge not to increase taxes on working people, which was so much laboured over, if you might excuse the expression, in the run-up to the budget, and perhaps it was felt that given the other wide-ranging tax increases that were being announced, notably employers' national insurance contributions, that this might be politically a step too far, given, of course, that Labour won a lot of rural constituencies in the general election outside of its traditional heartlands, and indeed some kind of suburban constituencies as well, where car use and in fact van use is prevalent. I'm guessing, but that might be the rationale.
But to counter that, I mean, one had to dig it up in the Red Book, but those rail fares are going up by 4.6% in the new year. Isn't that a tax on working people?
Well, it's where your definition stands, doesn't it? And in fact, yes, I think that was one of the prime examples of where you had to dive into the Red Book to find this 4.6% increase in regulated fares, which is retail price index +1, along with a £5 increase in the cost of rail cards.
That hit me. That's hit me.
Right.
Well, yes.
Right.
My
Okay.
senior
You're due for renewal, are you?
Yeah, well, I am, and it's only the disabled rail card. It will remain at 30, and this will be 35. I mean, that's so trivial. I mean, it's just petty, isn't it?
But presentationally, Christian, what was interesting was that these numbers have appeared in a long paragraph, an unusually long paragraph, which was really all about a theme we know the Treasury are anxious about, which is the level of public or government support that's been going into the railways since the pandemic, and the fact that although ridership is coming back, the corresponding revenue hasn't come back because of the loss of peak time commuter traffic and business travel.
So but as I've put in my forthcoming rail column, has anybody calculated the elasticity of this? In other words, has anyone actually looked at say, well, we're going to lose X amount of customers as a result of this, and we're going to gain X amount of revenue because it's 4.6. Remember, Mark, the railways are much more discretionary now. We don't have that bedrock of season ticket holders who will have to pay whatever because they live in Guildford and work in London. There's no other convenient or possible way of getting to work. But they've been lost. And so much of the travel is now discretionary, and they're much more price sensitive.
Yes, indeed. And that is not discussed at all in the document. One imagined it might be being discussed in the Department for Transport and with the industry. There were some other significant developments on rail, some of them re-announcements. So we did see that there is a pledge to continue with the East-West Rail project, big infrastructure capital programme, and Transpennine route upgrade and electrification, which the Chancellor did address in the speech.
But these are all old projects. There's nothing new there.
Well, that's right. It was just a kind of pledge to carry on with things that are already underway or in the pipeline. There was, though, a significant announcement on HS2 with the pledge to fund the tunnelling work from Old Oak Common to Euston, which we've discussed many times on this podcast.
Not the station. We don't know who is.
No. And here's the interesting expression that this tunnelling work is about catalysing private investment into the station and local area.
Yes.
So we don't really know what that means yet, other than that, as with the previous government, this one seems to be looking for a privately financed solution
Yeah, but we know
to
that
terminus.
100% private solution is never going to happen. So, one possible idea is that we end up with some sort of very temporary station at Euston with 6 platforms and maybe open air, whatever. And then they think about building something on top of it later. Who knows? I mean, we have no idea. And there's also no time scale of this. When are we anywhere near opening? I do know from my sources that it's not going to open by 2029. That's for sure. And it's doubtful that it will open in 2030. So it's we're looking to 2031, 32 to open any bit of HS2, and they'll need some sort of station at Euston. I don't think they can really run it properly from Old Oak Common if they're going to then move to Euston. That would be daft, but who knows?
Sure, but a significant move anyway. The fact that the tunneling is
That is,
allowing
yeah.
to proceed. Yeah,
It's no longer going to be the Acton to Aston shuttle.
not permanently anyway.
Yes,
No,
not permanent.
no.
One thing. What? Yes, go on. Sorry.
No, well, I was about to say that there was also mention in the budget documentation of a rolling stock strategy, and
Right.
linked to that, 485 million pounds for Transport for London capital spending, which includes the purchase of the additional trains for the Elizabeth line that were
Right.
announced during the general election campaign by the previous government, and which have kept open the Alstom train factory in Derby.
Right. Because they need extra trains.
From Old Oak Common,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
of the situation with
Yeah.
HS2. I believe that's part of the
Yeah.
justification for that. But Christian, did you want to say something else about
Well,
rail?
I mean, you haven't mentioned the bus fare. The
Well,
bus.
let's move on, shall we, to talk
Yes.
about some of the other modes. So there was £1 billion for ending the £2 bus fare single cap in England, but moving to a £3 bus fare cap, which will run until the end of 2025. And I think there are kind of mixed feelings about this. The joy that there is continuing to be a bus fare cap, but concern that it does actually, for many people, constitute a 50% increase in the fare.
The optics are terrible, Mark. Just terrible. I just can't understand why these kind of, in money terms, trivial measures, a few tens of millions, not even tens of millions, are being kind of touted. And what's more, they leaked this out beforehand, although I somewhat suspect there was some shenanigans going on between the Treasury and the Department of Transport, which is why it got leaked out in the way it did. But there was a lot of kind of coverage of that before the budget, and it just looks so mean, doesn't it? We're going to we're going to charge bus users more, who tend to be the poorer members of society, who can't afford cars, who have no alternative, who need these buses to get to jobs, and we're going to leave the car drivers alone. None of it. I just think their PR people have not kind of got their act together and said, "Do you know how this is going to look like?" I mean,
I do think it's strange, given that two of the government's 5 missions are economic growth and opportunity, creating opportunity for everyone, that the £2 bus fare does look to have been a really successful policy from the previous government, which has materially affected bus usage and opened up opportunity for people to get to jobs who might otherwise struggle, and also, of course, to a whole variety of other services as well, and retail and leisure opportunities as well. So yeah, I think it's from any way you look at it, it seems like a cause for, as I say, at least only partial celebration.
well, as
Fact,
my friend, the political commentator Steve Richards said, he quite liked the budget generally, but he said, "Oh, for transport, it's really poor," and I
right.
can't disagree with that.
Well, let's look at some of the other elements
Yeah,
that are in there as well. So there was £650 million pledged for local transport schemes, which are going to be specified in a later statement by the Secretary of State for Transport. So
right.
we'll see what those are. There was 100 million pledge for walking and cycling infrastructure.
Yes, again,
Um,
this is a bit disappointing. I do know that Active Travel England was hoping for more than that. And in terms of the overall transport budget, that's not an enormous amount, especially again, as you know, Louise Haig had given statements kind of emphasizing how important she thought this sort of these measures were, and she did seem to have understood the relationship between transport and health, and how, you know, if you want to reduce the cost of the National Health Service, then you get more people active. I mean, it's a no-brainer, but it doesn't yet seem to percolate it through into policy.
And then we had some interesting news on roads. So listeners will recall that back in the summer, when the Chancellor discovered the £22 billion black hole that she believes she has inherited from the previous government in the public finances, uh, she cancelled the A303 road scheme, the
The
Stonehenge scheme.
Stonehenge one.
Yeah. She cancelled the A27 scheme in southeast England, and also cancelled the remnants of the Restoring Your Railways beaching reversals programme that had been trumpeted by the previous government. So what we saw in the budget were the cancellation of three further road schemes. This was buried in the small print of the documentation. So three pretty significant road schemes were cancelled. There were some approvals, notably to road investment schemes in the east of England around the A47, but there are still quite a number of unresolved major road schemes in the programme, most significantly the Lower Thames Crossing, for which the planning decision has been deferred until next May, partly
and
to enable
it
the
is
financial review.
and it's due to cost a not insignificant 9 billion.
At least I think is
At
that
least,
I
and
think
it will
that's
be
seen
more than
seen as
that.
on the low side, the nine
Yes,
billion. Yeah, this is the daddy of all current
right.
road schemes. So the jury's still out on that one. There was £500 million extra for local roads maintenance. So essentially that was fixing potholes, which I
Is that
think
significant in terms of overall budget, or is that
commentary. I think most people feel all money is good when it comes to these kind of things, but there has been commentary that suggested that it's insignificant given the scale of the problem with road maintenance and the hazards that road users, not just motorists but cyclists and
absolutely?
pedestrians, face almost daily because of the condition of the roads. So let me see if there was anything else. I think that covers the road infrastructure
We
points.
had the West Yorkshire tram.
There was a pledge of investment for the taking forward the West Yorkshire tram scheme. That's right, notably in the light rail field. There was also £200 million for electric vehicle charging. 120 million for electric vehicle grants. I think this was for vans, for people trying to convert from fossil fuels to electric van operations. And so that was in the kind of roads and motoring space. And then there were some developments on aviation. So now that we have in a previous episode of this podcast discussed sustainable aviation fuel and
Yeah,
whether or not that's a contradiction in terms, but the Advanced Fuels Fund was extended to allow the continuing development of sustainable aviation fuels. There was a £2 per trip, I think it is, increase in air passenger duty for economy class flights on short haul trips. So I think that was seen as an environmental measure as well as a tax raising measure in the short haul aviation field, which
And then they've hit private flights, haven't they?
yes, so a 50% increase of the higher rates of APD for private jets, and a further review to look at APD in the
Poor old
sort of
Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak's going to be out of
you
pocket.
you couldn't help wonder at how
It's almost
narrowly
personal.
targeted that particular measure was. So I think that covers everything that I could find anyway when I went
Okay,
through the
well,
documentation.
well, that's very useful. I think it backs up the point that I'm making my forthcoming well column. That it's just incoherent. It's just there isn't there, and you know we've lacked transport policies really ever since the Ministry of Transport was created 100 years ago, and we're still there. There's not a kind of theme or thread or coherent strategy for anything. It's just a kind of patchwork of measures here and there, and willy-nilly, and we'll help these people a bit and help these and tax those people. But there's no idea, how do we use the transport infrastructure to best effect? How do we encourage sustainable transport? How do we kind of nudge people in the right direction? All of those things, none of that seems to be considered.
Well, as a consequence, I think, of the Maya report that was published in August, that had been commissioned by Louise Haigh when she was the Shadow Transport Secretary.
Yeah.
I believe there are moves to establish some kind of national transport strategy for England, and that there have been mentions of this in Parliament, and the suggestion that we might see something emerge in parallel with the spending review for the next few years, which is taking place between now and next spring, and also the continuing review of major infrastructure projects that the Department for Transport is carrying out. And I mentioned the unresolved issues around some of the road schemes in particular that we are awaiting the outcome to. So it may be, Christian, that you'll get your wish over the course of the next 5 or 6 months, and we might begin to see the emergence of some kind of strategy, some kind of hierarchy of transport modes, and some kind of prioritization for decision making.
Okay, well, good to end on a positive note, Mark. So let's hope you're right about that, and that we do see something coherent coming out of this.
Here's Christian's final thought from the Departure Lounge.
Well, it's gone below the radar a bit, but Transport for London has been affected for the last 3 or 4 months by a very sophisticated and damaging hacking attack. And indeed, it's been impossible for people to renew their freedom passes and their photo cards and all sorts of things. And lots of people are having to pay more for transport than they would otherwise, because they can't get the appropriate documentation. Now, TfL has just issued a statement saying that people can now start to get some of these documents again. It's hoping to restore things to normal. But, this is 3 or 4 months down the line, and it shows just how vulnerable our transport systems are to hacking attacks, and how this really could affect things across the board. And I've always argued that we're not paying sufficient attention to this, and we have too many eggs in the one basket. And there is really a risk that we might get to a situation where, the whole transport network is affected maybe for quite a long period of time. So watch this space. And if any of our listeners know anything about this that they would want to impart with us, do please contact us, because I think this is a story that is not going to go away.
Calling All Stations, the Transport Podcast with Christian Wolmar, is produced by Cogitamus Limited, a leading provider of public affairs consultancy services in the sector. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please consider giving us a 5-star rating with whichever platform you use. Do also follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. Our handle is @AllStationsPod.